Hello ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by sharedserviceslink.com and sponsored by Advanced Business Solutions. Today we're going to be looking at how to standardize processes and consolidate systems in a complex finance environment. So I am Susie West, as many of you well know. I'm the founder and CEO at sharedserviceslink.com, and I'm delighted to say that today I'm being joined by Will James, who's Head of Finance Systems at Friends Life, and Phil Brown, who's Head of Services, Professional Services at Advanced Business Solutions. So those are our two key speakers for today's webinar. So you obviously have a huge role to play in this. As ever, I know you're going to have questions to ask. So just to remind you how this works, pop your question through to me nice and early. The sooner you get it through to me, the more likely it is I will have a chance to post it to our experts. And do make sure that you stay on this webinar for the last 10 minutes in which we will be running the Q&A session. So let's have a look at the reason as to why we're actually having this discussion today. Shared services organizations and the companies that run shared services operations within their organizations are often complex in their structure, in their systems landscape, and in their process landscape as well. And that is generally because it's the large-scale organizations that have the business case to run with shared services. So the organizations that generally deploy shared services do by nature have a complex organizational structure, a complex systems landscape, and generally complex processes as well. And they're likely to have a complex systems landscape as well, in particular because of the organic growth or the mergers and acquisitions that have taken place. So it's quite interesting, obviously, to see that two aims of shared services has a number of aims, but two aims really to ensure that cost savings are realized, process improvements are seen, and there's an improvement around visibility and quality of data, really hang on the standardization of processes and the consolidation of systems. So this really is a key focus for today's session. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, please, and that is Phil Brown from Advanced Business Solutions. Over to you, please, Phil.
Thanks, Susie. Hi, I'm Phil Brown from Advanced Business Solutions. I'm your host for the session. I've got a quick bit of background about myself. I've got 22 years in the IT industry, 17 years on Tier 1 and 2 customer-facing shared services, finance, procurement, transformation projects in the government and commercial sector, and I've been across 5 continents. So I've not yet found an ERP implementation to do in Antarctica, but I'm sure that opportunity will come. So if we just want to take a quick look at the agenda, I'm going to start off with a bit of scene setting about what Advanced has seen in the last 5 years or so. Then I'm going to hand over to Will, who's going to give us an insight into the Friends Life transformational changes that have been supported by process standardization and shared systems. Then we're going to take a look at the things that Advanced has developed to assist in these areas and how these have been deployed in some of the other customers. And then we'll have Q&A. But rest assured, the majority of today's webinar will be with Will. So, in terms of, we'll begin with a quick review of what we've experienced in the last 5 years, and we'll use this to set the scene. So we're looking at the challenges, the imperatives, the initiatives, the innovation, and the impacts. So in terms, everybody's being challenged, but this may be in different ways, and probably in ways that are top to bottom across the organisations, whether you are in the government sector or in the commercial sector. But what we've noticed is that whilst life is getting a bit harder in the government sector, there are certain green shoots of recovery that are coming through in the commercial sector. And the grass may not be greener, but at least in this year's Leaders Summit in Davos, it was believed that the green shoots of recovery were there. So we've got things to look forward to. So The challenges in themselves create imperatives for change. So the challenges lead to a need for reduction in cost, and that always comes at the top of everybody's list. Looking at upstream and downstream processing, getting things right first time, achieving more with less, adding value and effectiveness, and generally creating overall service improvements that relate to all of the above. Now those imperatives of the need to do things are satisfied, or have been satisfied over the last 5 years, by a number of different initiatives that we've seen that have been brought by consulting houses, technology houses, and by customer organisations themselves. So the initiatives that we've seen address the challenges and imperatives are very varied. Some have a very strong technology bias, so either new or upgraded ERP or best-of-breed systems, or BI or corporate performance management information systems. Others have a greater emphasis on business transformation, but with a technology and innovation support aspect. So things like internal centres of excellence, internal shared service centres, but also external business processing and outsourcing. So at that point, we have a question for you. So I'd just like to hand over to Susie for Susie to ask the first question.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. So coming up on your screen, the first poll question of the day. There are 4 poll questions in total. So which back office transformation initiative is your organisation looking to invest in? Now you can tick as many of the boxes as are appropriate. So is it a new or upgraded finance and purchasing system, business intelligence or corporate performance management tools, further shared services investment, maybe it's a new shared services investment, or maybe it's a developed shared services investment, or perhaps you're actually looking at investing in outsourcing, or maybe there's another that we haven't yet captured. So please do tick all the boxes that are appropriate to your situation. We like to get the response rate to over 70%, and we are currently at 58% of you responding. So if you haven't already done so, I ask you to tick the boxes relevant to your situation. So which back office transformation initiative is your company looking to invest in? Please tick as many of the following as needed: newly upgraded finance purchasing system, business intelligence or corporate performance management tools, further shared service investments, outsourcing or other. We're at 68%. Please help us cross over the 70% barrier, closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. We came in at 71%. So the results being shared with you now. So interesting results here. We have 51% as the winner with further shared services investment. So very interesting results there. Very, very soon followed by, or quickly followed by, I should say, a new upgraded finance and purchasing system, coming in at third place, business intelligence and corporate performance management. So interesting results there. Back to you, please, Phil.
Thanks, Susie. I think those responses are very much in line with what we've seen in the marketplace. People looking more inwardly necessarily than outwardly, which is not a bad thing. I think that's quite a good thing. So the initiatives in themselves are very strong, but they do often require quite a lot of innovation, and we've certainly seen a lot of that as a key component to any of the initiatives. So the production line in Advanced has been thick and fast, initially with a lot of transaction processing support type of solutions, so self-service, e-procurement, e-invoicing, etc. But more recently we've seen a lot more drive and push from customers in the market for innovation in analytical and advisory tool sets. And all of that, of course, everybody talks about putting everything in the cloud. So whilst there is a lot of solution innovation, there's also a lot of delivery innovation. So putting things into the cloud, so software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. Now, the innovations that we've seen are market-led, and they're borne out by the Shared Services Link survey, which asks which 3 changes organisations have been budgeting for. So on the graph that you'll see there, I've just drawn a red line across the graph so you can see the areas that have attracted most interest. So those are in the areas of e-invoicing, ERP upgrade, lean processing, process improvement applications, scanning OCR, and shared services restructuring. And I think that that ties in with the areas you mentioned previously. So at this point, I'm going to hand back to Susie for her to ask question number 2.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. So again, as Phil mentioned, coming up on your screen, poll question number 2. So this really pertains to the technology or standardization enablers that your organization is looking to invest in. So please tick all that apply. Which of the back office process standardization or technology enablers is your company looking to invest in? Is it cloud technology? Is it budgeting and forecasting technology? So you might be looking at cloud technology for budgeting and forecasting technology, and in that case you would tick both of those boxes. Perhaps you're looking at purchase to pay, procurement, invoice automation technology, either by installing it or in the cloud. Or maybe you're looking at mobile technology as well, or maybe looking at other. So which ones of those enablers is your company currently looking at? So we're at 63% of you responding. As I say, we'd like to get over 70%, and we do share this information. It's very useful for you just to gauge what the market is looking at and where the market is at. So we're at 73%, closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen now. There is an out-and-out clear winner here at 83%, looking at purchase to pay, procurement, invoice automation, technology enablers. So that's a clear winner there, head and shoulders above the rest. And interestingly, 17% of you specifically looking at cloud technology and SaaS-based technology, with the budgeting and forecasting technology and mobile technology coming in at the 20s. So interesting results. So back to you, please, Phil.
Thanks very much, Susie. Yeah, it would go with that. Cloud technology, surprised that's as low as it possibly is. The P2P procurement, not surprised that that's so high. Nice to see budgeting and forecasting on the up, as well as specifically mobile. Okay, so innovation and initiatives are intended to have an impact, and the most typical way to structure these, we'll see on the screen, is in terms of organizational change, people changes, people and culture, process and systems. The change in each really depends on the initiatives or the technology, but all the aspects really should be considered nonetheless. So that's me for now. So let's have a look back at the agenda to see where we are and what's coming up. So we've looked at advanced experience over the last 5 years or so, and I'd just like to hand over to Will James now, and he can talk about the imperatives, the initiatives and the innovation that are affecting his organisations, people, process and systems. So over to you, Will.
Great, thank you, Phil. So first of all, a few words about Friends Life for those who haven't heard of the company. And seeing what our marketing department spent, I can't believe you haven't heard of us. So we're a listed company via another name, Resolution, and that was brought together to consolidate life and pensions companies. So we're crunching together what was Friends Provident, most of AXA Life in the UK, and a business that came from BUPA. But those companies themselves were actually mergers of other companies. So I've put a few logos there to give an idea. The result is we've got lots of duplicated systems, i.e. systems doing the same things, often quite elderly, and they may have started off in the 1970s and been ported and rehosted, but actually quite a lot of system problems. A huge amount of business change, either because of external factors or things we're choosing to do, and multiple locations. So quite easy to change the branding. We became Friends Life in March 2011. Got 5 million customers in the UK and various international places, and including our also outsourced partners where people work just on our business. There's probably just over 10,000 people supporting all of those customers. My background is as a chartered management accountant, so I did quite a long stint in budgeting, planning, modelling and so on. Found that a bit too exciting, so moved into finance change in its various flavours, be it systems, putting in general ledgers, and introducing shared services and offshoring. The key thing throughout that, whether it's budgeting or offshoring, is I've got a passion for people, behaviours, and making change sustainable. At Friends Life, I look after finance systems, so that's E5 from advanced and related applications in what's very complex because it's multi-site and we've got outsourced IT partners. And our agenda, which we'll look at the kind of perfect storm, actually covers all the things relating to finance. I'm not trying to talk about the entire company. But at the start of 2011, we had all the things we're doing in terms of separating and integrating businesses, but there was a lot of regulatory and external change going on. It's quite amazing pulling together similar organizations, actually from a distance are the same, but once you get into it, extremely different cultures. AXA, for example, had a US listing, so we had lots of SOX controls. We also had a lot of complexity just by doing similar things in different ways. So you wouldn't believe it, but as simple as invoice approval, there were probably about 3 or 4 different methodologies employed and a mix of technology and paper. So a kind of impossible situation at that stage. Throughout the change period, we've also had different agendas coming out, largely because we've had change in directors. So chief executive changed, chief financial officer, and lots of other senior appointments. And also we were plagued by consultants, as you do in these situations, and interims, who again were just bringing in their own particular foibles and hobby horses. We had some quite interesting debates about whether we were going to go for bleeding edge or whether we were going to do something that was good enough. And taking back to my accounting heritage, good enough actually delivers most of the benefit. And then you spend the same again just going for that elusive final 20% or whatever. We encountered some madness. So because we'd got budgets established for separating businesses, we weren't allowed to do anything other than lift and shift. So the argument that while we were doing things we could improve something, oh no, that's a different budget, and do the integration and tidy up later on. So quite a few lively discussions going on with colleagues. Crucial thing was people were being subject to changes in the terms and conditions, relocations, TUPEing. So taking the people with you, because they're the ones that have got to do it, absolutely essential during all of this. I would say that what's on Phil's slides in terms of imperatives and innovations, we've had most of those. So I'm going to look at shared services, why we went for shared services that wasn't actually a separate shared services function. And I've called that embedded, because what we didn't do was set up a different function with branding, a separate building, but what we chose to do was centralize on the best system from the different root companies. So that helped us because there was less disruption, but it did mean we had a lot of internal governance arrangements to look at. So what we've got is the shared services are actually owned by one of the main trading business units. So they have to demonstrate that they're not giving bias and favoritism to themselves in the way they deal with other areas of the business. So that does lead to the discussions about KPIs, costs, priorities, and the trade-off that you get, whatever the structure is, that the shared service to be efficient needs standardization. The various business units, directorates, whatever areas of the business always feel that their customers, their products, their way of dealing with things are special and therefore need some unique template or different way of reporting things. Went for standardization. We've got the battle scars from that, largely because we had to reduce costs. We're regulated by the FSA and they were looking for one way of doing things. That's what the auditors are like as well. So occasionally we had to go round and around a few times to actually sell that idea. The other aim of it was consistency, both in the accounting treatment, but having one set of data so that we could actually know what we're doing in terms of decision making. I'm not going to talk through the box on the right, but that was essentially if you go brownfield, i.e. the advantages, disadvantages of doing that, which is just another way of looking at what I've talked about. The one thing I would like to have done on that disadvantage there, though, is have a culture that was around shared services with relevant staff policies and ways of rewarding people for customer service, but we weren't able to do that. So moving on swiftly from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about one data set. And beginning of 2010, we didn't know all this was coming. By the end of 2010, early 2011, we'd got a plan of what we wanted to achieve. So in the green on the left there is what in life and pensions are called policy admin systems, i.e. where your pension or life policy would be looked after. So for that, that could be the same as a retailer system, distribution, warehousing, whatever, the underlying core business systems. And a very convoluted chain of things moving through data warehouses. Common plan for the end of 2012 was in the middle there, E5, to be one general ledger with common processes and common ways of accounting for similar things. Because of the need to report, and we've got a number of actuaries in the business who like to take things and model them in order to work out various things, we've got a need to convert data, translate it over, and ultimately move it into Hyperion, which is where we do the group accounting. So we have a combination of current technology that we were using, planned changes, and some new technology that was being introduced. Moving on to the next slide actually shows that view in a different way. So the organisation, when we first came together in 2010 at the top left, had a number of legal entities, and legal entities mean systems. So what's been going on as I've been doing system change is we've been doing something called Part 7 transfers, which actually moves the different life and pensions liabilities into less and less companies, which reduces cost and complexity immediately. In the middle there, we started off with 4 general ledgers, and summer of 2012 we got to a single general ledger by moving all the various businesses that we'd inherited off their old systems. So very proud of that. It was done at pace, on time, on budget, and that's supported by various other models. So as Susie said when she opened, we've got a myriad of complex systems, and we've got to keep things moving. Despite that one data set, it's still a complicated world. So the backbone, flowing from left to right in the center there, is the E5 general ledger. And of course, general ledger has got modules closely associated with it that we use, like fixed assets or purchasing. But we feed data in from things you'd expect, like payroll, but all the various policy systems. The complex thing is that some of that comes from parts of the organization that we've bought and subject to firewalls and that kind of thing. At the top in the salmon color are various outputs. So the multiple systems means reconciling things, producing data for reporting, and dealing with a number of outsourced providers who look after the different systems. So when something goes wrong, typically there might be 3 or 4 different parties involved. So very, very complex. Moving on to the objectives of shared services, absolutely crucial at the outset was to talk to various stakeholders about what was important, what they wanted, and also what they didn't want. So I've taken a list here that I borrowed from Accenture, and we use this to say which of these are we going to focus on, how are we going to, say, rationalize the model, how are we going to manage the customers and the staff, what are we doing in the technology area, what's the aim of all of this? And it was effectively to support the business in a cost-effective way and make it scalable. Because in the early days, we weren't quite sure how the organization was going to develop. We may well have made another large acquisition, so we had to be geared up for the future, which wasn't known. And I found, in terms of presenting this to the senior finance team, but also internal customers who use finance systems for settling debts and paying invoices and so on. It's really, really essential to get from them what they wanted. And I did a lot of external research to find models that were examples of what we could achieve. So BA have got a particularly good vision, in my view, which actually brings to life what their team looks like and what the side effects of shared services are. So, for example, maximizing working capital, clearing out queries from auditors quickly, and continuously improving and being cost effective. So we use this to really talk about what it was going to be like and use that with the affected staff so they can actually see, there's a chance here to learn some new skills and experiences, and if nothing else, improve my employability. Coming on to the implementation path and the lessons from that is having that clear plan was obviously essential, but there were times when it was right to deviate from that, and we were mindful of that. We looked carefully at the entire business rather than just the finance view of the world. So in the middle there, don't forget business transformation. By the changes that we were initiating, really, really important because we were affecting how people engage with finance, both sides, data in and data out. So if we needed them to change things, we had to be very clear about that. Really, really essential as well was to baseline current performance, how quick we're paying invoices and those kind of things, because people come back and forget what it was like a year or two previously. So keeping those statistics just so we could remind them that we have improved, we are on target, and we are doing it at less cost or whatever the key things are. And really, really, really key to do things at pace, because once you start drifting, you don't actually have that credibility, and senior management need to be engaged and sound ambassadors for what you're doing, because otherwise the CFO or someone else in the senior finance team will get buttonholed at the end of a meeting about a problem. He'll then think that something is dramatically wrong, and it's really, really minor, but if he knows what you're doing and that there are going to be some teething problems, he can defend you. So using that external material, but also information from internal colleagues, we came up with the target operating model, which was around process improvement, standardization and centralization, but that we would continually improve, which actually gives you a get out of jail card, because you're not going to get to that end state on day one. That we would improve the control of the organization by understanding process, documenting it, and use technology. So we used OCR for capturing invoice data, for example, which meant we could process far more invoices than we had before with a much smaller number of people. And again, I keep mentioning this, bringing the people with you. So an idea from Pfizer, which I've shown on the bottom there, every person in their finance shared service goes out for a day a year with a salesman. That means they understand where margin gets destroyed. If duplicate payments are made, that guy's got to work much harder just for the organisation to stand still. It just brings the whole thing to life and gives that understanding of why they're here and what they're part of. We also talked to people about what the principles were. So here's some examples from invoice scanning and P2P. And it's part of message management. We weren't going to achieve all of those initially. So in the processes on the top right, yes, we're going to get standardized process, but we weren't going to become paperless immediately. There were still going to be some deals that were going through that weren't with preferred suppliers. But it's kind of multi-layer, so do the baseline and then add purchase orders. And kind of using lots and lots of explanations to people so they knew what to expect and when was part of taking people on that journey. We're also keen on self-service and just most things being automatic and just deal with the awkward exceptions. And the shared service journey was part of an overall transformation of the finance function. So where we started, which is on the left-hand side of this, very roughly the red line at the end of 2010, was not where I wanted to be, which is very roughly the green line towards the right. So everything we're doing was tested against the plan. So, for example, on data quality, we'd got inconsistent data in multiple systems. So part of that system landscape change was to actually move to reliable data sources. We had got a finance systems architecture which wasn't integrated, which was clumsy, which was error-prone. So again, moving to those integrated systems was part of that. Lots of things in terms of the way we dealt with the business around financial management and reporting, which again needed improvement. You couldn't do any one of these without the other, because to do the financial management you need the people, to do the improving the reporting close cycle you needed the systems and so on. We have actually made dramatic improvements. There's another diagram which I'm not showing, which is the numbers of, say, exceptions and problems that we had and where we are now, how the audit management letter is for this year end compared to a couple of years ago. So it is part of a consolidated and coordinated improvement. We also changed CFO in the middle of this. So Tim Tukey arrived in March 2012. So part of his induction, if you like, was explaining what we're doing, why, and how it fitted. He countered with his analogy of being a pilot or co-pilot sitting next to the chief exec, and what he wanted to do, which was those bullets, analytical understanding, financial planning, and so on. Thankfully, a lot of what we're doing supported one or more of those and fitted in with a kind of active finance view that actions speak louder than words. So we were demonstrating constantly that we've been efficient, we were reducing costs, we were matching what the business was aspiring to do. And coming back to a roundup, we've got various shared service provocations that I put down here. Once you start looking on the web, there is masses of material, and in my view, here's some of the best. The standardized point that I made, although the business will resist it, there's no point having 3 ways of processing invoices just because someone likes doing it the way they used to do it at the last company. It has to be standardized. You also need to maintain that momentum, because otherwise it will just drift and drift. And once it's in the shared service, the things that go wrong with shared services, it doesn't matter whether they're a shared service centre in a different building or country, or whether it's embedded as it is at Friends Life, it's actually service quality, service difficulties. So maintaining that whilst looking at costs and efficiency is absolutely essential. And the key thing in the yellow box is planning and modelling reduces the risk of a wrong decision. So I had to make some big bets in terms of which technology we were using. You're then stuck with that for 5 or 10 years. So taking the time out to make sure that that's right for the organisation and flexible enough for the future is absolutely essential. So to summarise, when doing something like this, there are actually trade-offs. What suits shareholders or the council or the government isn't always what the customer or the policyholder wants, and it certainly isn't what the members of staff want. There are choices to be made, so you can do something and get most of the value by something fairly quick, or you can think, actually, this is such a cool thing, it's our general ledger, we're going to take the time and make it scalable and resilient. Large organizations means processes cross departments and, in our case, third parties, because we've got business process outsourcing as well. And that's where it gets difficult because people have got different agendas. So following those processes and dealing with the people issues, really, really important. There's also an implementation learning that the project professionals were keen on Prince 2 and various gates and filling in various charts and so on. That's useful, but you can be a slave to those and miss the really obvious things. So not paying attention to the things that are really happening around culture, debates about risk, or whether something should be in-house or outsourced, really, really key. You know, you might have everything green on the Gantt chart or whatever, but you're missing the obvious. And really, really essential to know where you're going. That's, in our case, was the systems architecture, but also the organizational design, the way things work, and hence the importance of planning without kind of losing half the week on reporting and reassuring people. So it's a people thing. Right, I'll now hand back to Phil.
Thanks, Will. I think we'll all agree that was an excellent insight into some of the very interesting and far-reaching changes in Friends Life and the role of advanced know-how in your changes. So advanced know-how touches all of the aspects of change, including the organisation, people, process, systems, and even the cloud. And part of the challenge is to maximise the benefits of these changes, but reducing the cost of change and lowering the pain threshold. One simple way to do this is to follow process and system blueprints, adopt and adapt to local needs. So finance and procurement are generally believed to be complex, especially in Tier 1 and Tier 2 organisations, but advanced know-how includes sector-specific, process-specific templates that make it easy to adopt generally accepted good practice and focus on providing local best practice. The benefits of the adopt and adapt blueprints are inherent in the specific objectives of the individual process or technology change, so minimising design and build, better user acceptance, faster benefits realisation, lower costs, better timescales. But they also provide a cornerstone for more strategic changes that the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accounting has very well summarised for us in terms of the standardise, consolidate and shared journey. So SIPFA is, as I said, is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accounting in the United Kingdom. They set the standards for all government finance reporting. And they've done some analysis and investigation and given us an illustration that shows us the effects on the total cost of finance, especially headcount, in removing complexity, standardizing processes and sharing common systems. We can see from looking at the graph going left to right, the individual bars, the cost of finance is reduced by approximately 50% by the time we get to common systems, standard simple processes, even if it is in multiple locations and isn't actually a shared service. But we can also see from the illustration that internal shared services or external shared services, business process outsourcing, could halve the cost of finance again. So at that point, I'd just like to ask Susie if she can ask question number 3.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. So coming up on your screens now, poll question number 3. Which of the following is shared in your company? So please tick all that apply. We share common processes, we share systems, we run shared services, we run outsourcing either partially or fully, or perhaps you do not share any of the above. So please tick all that apply. We share common processes, we share systems, we run a shared services organisation, we run outsourcing either partially or in full, or we do not share any of the above. So as I say, looking for over a 70% response rate, please. We're currently at 61%, so if you haven't already ticked the relevant boxes, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We're at 68% of you responding there. Let's have a look at the data. So coming up on your screen now, 78% is coming in as sharing systems. So 78% of you share systems, followed by 74% of you running a shared services organisation, and then 68% sharing common processes, and 44% running outsourcing either partially or fully. So interesting results. Try and hold on to those results, because we're going to do a bit of a comparison with a later question. Back to you, please, Phil.
Thanks, Susie. Yeah, very interesting results. I can only assume that most of the audience are very large tier 1 kind of enterprises who currently have economies of scale to do that kind of work. So we'll look at some of the case studies following on from Friends Life, of other organisations who've used a bit of advanced know-how in their process standardisation and system sharing. So we'll start with the cooperative group. It's a UK retailing organisation. It's the 5th largest retailer, with about 15 different businesses, close to £10 billion per annum turnover. They've got an excess of 500 employees just in the finance department, but they're a much more diverse retailer than the other large UK retailers like Walmart, Tesco, etc. In that they've got some very diverse business. So they have a funerals business, they have car showrooms, they do clothing manufacturing, they run their own farms. So they've undertaken a huge change program in trying to maximise that individual brand of the cooperative group, but that all started with systems consolidation. So back in 2008, the systems consolidation piece, they merged, the cooperative group merged with a neighbouring cooperative, about a third of the size and scale. The United Corp had wall-to-wall, pretty much Unit 4 applications, and the cooperative group itself, each of the individual business units had a multitude of different systems, Oracle, Advanced Systems, Sage, Sun Accounts, etc. When the two businesses merged, they went to an interim stage of systems rationalisation. And so you can see in the third column from the right, they were still running quite a lot of different applications, but since then they've moved on and standardized all of the processes and systems to the advanced solutions. This is it's an immense systems consolidation. Has been the platform to some impressive statistics about the cooperative group finance transformation program. The program was the largest UK shared services in 2008, as advised by PwC. It's delivered £5 million per annum recurring benefits. There's 15 businesses on a single chart of accounts. They've implemented 2 centres of excellence as shared services. There are over 3,500 users processing over 150 million transactions in the general ledger. It's also the single non-staff payment system. So all goods and services that the cooperative group purchases are paid through Advanced Solutions. Moving on to another example would be Aer Lingus. They dramatically reduced the business processes they had in the P2P environment from 14 different ways of making a procurement to only 2. You either had a purchase ordered or they used purchasing cards. And that's had a huge impact on the process statistics, but it's been essential as part of £97 million cost savings that were made by 2012, £50 million of which have been through staff efficiencies. But you don't have to be large. Three Rivers and Watford councils, which are just on the outskirts of London in the UK, shows that the benefits of standardised processes and sharing systems are not only restricted to large commercial organisations. The two councils decided that large operational cost savings were available by sharing systems and processes, but also starting by sharing the management team. So they went for joint chief executive, joint finance director, etc. So the economies of scale may not be obvious if you're small, but they can be unlocked by bulking up and sharing with a neighbour. At the other end of the spectrum, the benefits on a national scale are more obvious. The health and social care in Northern Ireland is the single body responsible for all health services and social care services in the country. They had a vision to procure and implement business systems to support the modernisation of the HSC and to deliver customer-focused shared services. So they had that vision. It was brought about predominantly off a technology platform, so shared infrastructure, shared processes and shared systems, and that's helped to deliver significant reduction in headcount, adding up to approximately £119 million savings over 10 years. But this is just the start of the journey for the HSC. The next leg of the journey is to reduce processing centres from 15 to 4, and that shared service centre journey has already begun. So at that point, I'd just like to hand back to Susie again to ask the final question of the day.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Phil. So coming up on your screen, poll question number 4, please. So this really is looking at what your company should be sharing. So which of the following do you think should be shared within your company, or perhaps shared even more than they currently are? So we should share common processes. We should share systems, either completely or more than we are today. We should run shared services or do more of shared services. We should run outsourcing either partially or fully, or perhaps you don't think there should be any sharing going on. We should not share systems, processes, or operations straight organisation. So if you can just tick the boxes which you believe there should be more sharing of processes, systems, shared services, perhaps outsourcing, or maybe not at all. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. I don't know if there are going to be too many surprises here, but let's see. So 94% of you think that there should be more sharing, or should be at least a sharing of common processes, 88% sharing of systems, 83% running of shared services, or the sharing of the organisation, and interestingly 35% are coming in saying we should run outsourcing either partially or fully. And of course, very encouraging, none of you think that there should be no sharing at all. So interesting results there. Back to you, please, Phil.
Thanks very much, Susie. Yeah, very good results. Pleased to see everybody thinks sharing is a good thing. So I'd just like to recap before we close out. So the imperatives, initiatives and innovation are all in place to address the challenges. We can see how far process standardization and system consolidation will help in cost reduction, but clearly sharing offers more. Will's given us great insight and much to consider, including standardize before sharing, make sure you have a clear vision, consider the trade-offs, get buy-in, make sure you've got some senior sponsorship. Planning is essential, benefits realization, keep the pace going with momentum, but most importantly of all, I think Will stressed, is focus on the people and the culture, and make sure they're on board. And from ourselves, Advance would simply recommend that you don't try and reinvent the wheel. Adopt and adapt is always a good way to do things. So that's the end of the slides. So on behalf of Will and Advance, thank you very much for listening in. Now I'll hand over to Susie to chair the questions. Over to you, Susie. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Will and Phil. We have a lot of questions, but if you haven't already sent your questions through, please do so, and we have time for questions in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So a question for you, Will. So you did allude to a slide or a bit of information that we didn't go into actually on this webinar regarding approximate cost reduction. This particular view is asking for the actual ballpark figure. If you're not comfortable with the ballpark, maybe you can give us an idea of a percentage saving that was realized.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. Thank you, Susie. It varies tremendously depending about whether you're talking about, say, invoice processing or higher cost budgeting, planning and everything else. The minimum we got was 25–30%. In some areas we were able to eradicate completely some redundant reconciliations and processes, so we saw the order of 55–60%. But it's fair to say we did have to add in some extra functions that didn't exist before simply to make shared services work. So you've got to look at it in the round, in the totality of it.
Okay, thank you. And as far as business case delivery was concerned, was that on plan as far as a business case, or did you overachieve?
Again, it was a portfolio effect. So broadly, the business case was delivered. However, there were parts of it that, with hindsight, were just too ambitious. And there were some things that we did overachieve simply because we didn't know enough about the kind of legacy parts of the organisation, how some of the things worked until we took them apart. So we got a tick in the box of delivering the overall business case, but the mix changed. So we saved less on some of the IT, we saved more on some of the rationalisation of the way we're doing things. The key thing for the organisation was actually the run rate coming out of it all in terms of what it was going to cost to run the organisation for the first year running as we intended to run, if that makes sense.
Okay. Some might consider this a bit of a sensitive matter, but I'll ask it nonetheless. And if you're in a position to respond, that would be good. And this question is to Will. It's the same viewer who's asking this question. Was there also a redundancy plan, and who handled that and how?
I think I can comment on that because it's been in the press that we have had redundancies. I think they would have occurred irrespective of the organisation structure and i.e. whether they were doing shared services or not. It was part of getting fit for what's quite a challenging environment. So some redundancies occurred simply because processes were redundant. So I mentioned that AXA used to be a SOX regulation. We didn't have to do Sarbanes-Oxley, so we didn't need to have those people. By taking, say, 3 accounts payable functions and crunching them together, you didn't need 3 supervisors. So some things you could envisage irrespective of whether it was bad shared services or not. There are others where the redundancy probably occurred after we transitioned some of the work to an outsourced partner. As they reached economies of scale, then numbers would go down. But where feasible, we used natural wastage and retrained people who'd got a lot of organisational knowledge into new roles. But now I have to admit the total number employed across the whole business is less than it would have been 3 years ago.
Thank you very much, Will. I'll put this to you as well, Will. As far as you gave us an idea about the length of time that this took, but if you could maybe drill down into the numbers a little bit more, how long did the project take from the planning right the way through to completion?
Okay, the project took just about bang on 2 years. So the planning cycle had some, if you like, burning platforms that we had to deal with in the short term. So we had some quick win implementations, and you never finish this kind of thing, but we've reached a state of maturity bang on time within the 2 years.
Okay, good, thank you. And how do you ensure the standard process is not, so this is for Will again, how do you ensure the standard process is not a poor compromise when dealing with old divisional or geographical ways of working?
This is the nub of it, so thank you for a very good question. Standard process doesn't have to be a poor compromise, provided that you understand the organisation and what you're trying to achieve. There has to be some give and take, but given that a lot of the things that are done in shared services are actually bound by HMRC, internal audit or other guidelines, actually a lot of the stuff you've got to standardise has to be done in a particular way in order to get over those hurdles. By allowing some, I won't allow customization, but there are some parts where we can do supplementary analysis simply to satisfy if you've got some high net worth customers or particular oddities. But the key thing is to have those honest, robust conversations so you don't have a poor compromise. In other words, that you take the best from, in our case, the 3 or 4 different heritage processes. So everybody is seeing some improvement as well as what they might see as going backwards in some areas. It's hard. The main thing you can have is an honest conversation and make sure that there's nothing that you're doing which is going to damage the business or increase risks or something that you wouldn't want to happen as a side effect.
Thank you very much for that honest answer there, Will. And I'll come on as well. Another question for you. It sounds like there is an awful lot of change management that's required. Who was in charge of change management within the organisation? Was it the finance team? Was it the systems team, finance systems team? Was it HR? Was it outside consultants? How did that happen?
We didn't actually have a floor or a room with change management on the door, and nobody had that title. One of my ex-colleagues at Aviva has actually got the title of Group Talent Director, which I love, and they could have done change management. It was a responsibility sometimes of one function. So, for example, IT were crunching together the different networks, versions of Outlook and all that kind of thing into a consolidated system. So that part of the change was managed by them and quite discreet. There were things that were unique just to finance, and there were other programs which affected the whole organization. So, for example, looking at locations and working out which we were going to keep and which we were going to close. Those that went across the organization like that were actually part of a kind of consolidated overall transformation program. And then sitting beneath that, where if one project was doing something that either had a dependency on another project or would affect another area of the business, then there was a kind of cross-check. So, for example, there was some rehosting going on from one data center to another, and we had to make sure that that didn't conflict with system go live or some other change that was going on. So change, to answer in summary, change was the responsibility of all the functions mentioned, i.e. IT, HR and finance, but there were times when we all had to come together. So I had a dependency on people in procurement, HR, to do certain things for me and vice versa. The main thing was to avoid a kind of 50-mile car pile-up in the fog on the motorway.
Okay, good. Thank you. Unfortunately, we've only got 3 minutes left, which gives us time really for 2 more questions. Again, sorry, I feel like I'm swamping you with questions, Will, but this is a question I will put to you. How complex and time-consuming was it to do the data migration from legacy systems to your current landscape?
The data migration was immense. We've mentioned that we're moving from SAP and PeopleSoft into E5, and we were hitting a moving target in that we had to migrate the current year as well as the previous year. So whereas the previous year was sealed, we were obviously adding more and more months into what was then the current year. The volume of the data wasn't so much the problem. It was several million lines. It was more the need to transform it from the old accounting structure into the new. And it was fine when data was coming from many accounts into one, but we did have a number of instances where it's coming from one account, i.e. in SAP, into many in E5, because we're splitting things by product, business area, or even in the expense area across several nominals. And that meant actually going in and hand cranking the data. We had some really good people on that who kind of eat data and manipulate huge amounts. And it was done in a very controlled way. So we had reconciliations before, after, did it through a test system, and I have to say it went without a hitch. And we've now got the auditors doing the year end and crawling all over it, and they are extremely happy. But the data migration was something that was quite discreet. It didn't actually affect people in the business, didn't have a dependency on HR or procurement, so it was something we could lock a group away, and they worked methodically through it in a very controlled way.
Good. Thank you very much. I thought we might have time for one more, but we are out of time. So So Will and Phil Brown, thank you very much for a very insightful webinar and a great story from you, Will, James. Thank you. Just want to highlight to people that we have two wonderful conferences coming up. They're the Summit for Leaders in Shared Services, one in London in March and one in Chicago in April. So do make sure that you look into that information and register. We have a couple of places left at March and a few places left at the April event. Also, we have a number of webinars coming up over the next 6 or so weeks. So do look out for them and make sure that you register. So look forward to welcoming you next time, and goodbye. Thank you.